Hey everybody, I am Chris Baker from Lucky Gunner, and today I am comparing 5 different medium frame double action 22 revolvers. You have entered Project Rimfire, my friends, where I am reviewing an absolutely stupid number of handguns, all chambered for 22 long rifle. Let's look at our contenders for the medium frame revolver category. We have the Smith & Wesson 617 mountain gun, the Colt King Cobra target, the Ruger GP100, Taurus 992 tracker, and just for fun, the Spohr 283 carry. Now, before we get into the comparisons, I want to tackle a couple of questions that have come up in the comments. What are these guns actually for, and why do they cost so much? We are used to semi-auto 22s being cheaper than centerfire pistols, and that's because they are mechanically simpler and they use fewer expensive parts and materials. Double action 22 revolvers are different. They're essentially the same as their centerfire counterparts, just with smaller holes. In some cases, they actually require more machining, and they're usually produced in smaller quantities. So if you're comparing two otherwise identical models, the Rimfire version will typically cost about the same or sometimes even more. So why spend $1,000 on a medium frame 22 revolver? They're not ideal for self-defense. For a lightweight kit gun, a small frame 22 usually makes more sense. For a dedicated target gun, semi-auto 22s are generally more accurate. For me, there are two main reasons to own one of these. First, they are outstanding training tools. You don't need a centerfire revolver to get the training benefits that come from mastering a double action trigger. Second, and maybe more importantly, they're just fun. These guns have the weight, the balance, and the mechanical feel of a centerfire revolver without the noise, recoil, or ammunition cost. Unlike a lot of semi-auto 22s, they feel like serious guns instead of range toys. And what makes this lineup of 5 guns we're about to look at especially compelling is that every one of them is legitimately a good revolver. Now, they're not all equally good, but each one has some compelling strengths. So let's take a closer look at our 5 contenders, starting with the 2 you may have already seen if you've been following this series. The Smith & Wesson 617 mountain gun is the newest variant of their 10-shot stainless K-frame, featuring a 4-inch half-lug barrel and no internal lock. It's a Lipsy's distributor exclusive. MSRP is $11.99, and it's currently selling at or above that due to limited supply. The price should go down a bit once production catches up. The Colt King Cobra target is offered in 5 barrel length options, and we're looking at the 3-inch model. Like the Smith, it's a 10-shot stainless revolver. Most retailers are listing these in the $850 to $950 range. The 22 version of the Ruger GP100 is another 10-shot stainless revolver. This one has a 5.5-inch barrel and a partial underlug. Ruger previously offered a 4-inch model, but this is the only configuration available now. You can typically find these for under $900. The Taurus 992 tracker we have here is the matte black 4-inch version. It's also offered in stainless or with a 6.5-inch barrel. It's a 9-shot revolver because it includes both a 22 long rifle and a 22 Magnum cylinder. Retail pricing is usually around $600 to $700. Spohr is a premium German revolver manufacturer, and the 283 carry is their 3-inch 22 model. They also offer longer barrel lengths and versions without the integral Picatinny rail. The design is patterned after the Smith & Wesson L frame with a number of improvements like a user-adjustable mainspring to tweak the double-action trigger weight. Although the cylinder could physically hold 10 rounds, German engineering regulations limit it to 8. These are sold directly by Spohr and priced at $33.99. Now, I realize very few people are comparison shopping a $3,400 revolver with a Taurus, but after being impressed with Spohr's 44 Magnum last year, I thought it would be interesting to see how their Rimfire stacks up against these others. Every gun in Project Rimfire goes through 4 tests: reliability, accuracy, speed, and a practical test. After spending some time with these revolvers, I thought I knew how this would play out, but there were a few surprises. For all the testing, I installed Gideon Omega green dot sights on each gun. Huge thanks to Gideon for providing the optics. Having identical dots across all 5 revolvers helped remove as many variables as possible. The Omega has a large window and a bright dot, which made it easier to wring out the best performance from each gun. Let's start with the reliability test. The standard here is simple. 100 rounds of CCI mini mags, clean the gun, then 100 rounds of CCI standard velocity. All 5 passed without issue. And that's not surprising. Revolvers don't suffer the same cycling problems as semi-autos, but 22 revolvers do have their own quirks. Rimfire ammo leaves behind a lot of fouling, and if debris builds up in the chambers or under the extractor star, the cartridges may not completely seat when you put them in there. When that happens, the firing pin's energy gets used up, pushing the case forward instead of crushing the rim. That's why 22 revolvers often have heavier hammer springs. With that in mind, only one gun gave me ignition trouble, and that was the Smith & Wesson 617. It runs perfectly when it's clean, but after about 200 to 300 rounds, I started getting occasional failures to fire. The trade-off is that it has the lightest and smoothest action of the group. For the speed test, I'm using the Steel Challenge Stage Smoke and Hope. From low ready, you engage the 4 large plates in any order and then the smaller stop plate. I shot 10 runs with each gun and added the best 4 times. The Taurus came in a distant 5th place. Then there was a tight spread between the Smith, Colt, and Spohr. And the definitive win goes to the GP100 with a cumulative 7.62 seconds. That's 4 runs under 2 seconds each. Now, this test is heavily influenced by my ability, preferences, and prior experiences. So the why, I think, matters more than just the raw numbers. The Taurus struggled because of the trigger. It's not just heavy, it's also uneven. It kind of starts out light and then it gets super heavy at the end of the trigger stroke. It's difficult to shoot fast without steering the gun off target. The Spohr is very heavy for a 3-inch gun. I shot some good times with it, but for the first few runs, it felt a little sluggish on the transitions. The GP100 was the big surprise here. The trigger is smooth, but very heavy, so I had low expectations. But for whatever reason, barrel length, balance, grip, some combination, the dot was just always right where I wanted it to be. Now, I'd love to compare it to another longer barreled pistol, like maybe the 6-inch version of the 617, but if I was gonna take one of these 5 guns to an action pistol competition, it would be the Ruger. But now we have to talk about accuracy, and this is sadly where the party ends for the GP100. For the accuracy test, I fired 2 5-shot groups from a bench rest at 25 yards with 4 different loads. The Taurus and GP100 each shot a couple of good groups, but there were a lot of flyers. The Taurus disliked mini mags, and the Ruger showed occasional keyholing with Ely 10X. I also shot some Magnum groups with the Taurus, and the accuracy was even worse. The Spohr performed well, but not at the level I expected based on my experience with their 44 Magnum. I was really hoping for consistent sub 1-inch groups, and it did not quite deliver on that. The Colt and Smith both shot very well for production revolvers, with the Smith taking the lead. It shot multiple sub 1-inch groups and performed especially well with Ely Club. The practical test combines speed and accuracy. I place a B8 bullseye target at 10 yards and fire 8 shots as quickly as possible while keeping my hits in the black, hopefully. I combine my time and score using this formula, which heavily penalizes misses. I shoot 5 runs with each gun. For double action revolvers, the practical test is mostly about trigger control, but the gun's overall weight and balance also play an important role. They help determine how much the muzzle wants to move as you press the trigger. The Smith and the Spohr both stood out on this test. The Smith's trigger is exceptionally smooth. I did swap the factory grips for a set of Altamont Altai grips that fit my hand a little better after sanding off some corners, so that might have helped. The weight of the Spohr was an asset for this test. It's forgiving of a less than perfect trigger press and has very little muzzle rise. The Ruger and Taurus actions both have room for improvement, so it's no surprise their scores were lower. I was surprised that I didn't do better with the Colt. It has a really nice action, but I think it struggled because it's just lighter than the others. I probably should have compensated with a bit more grip pressure. Now, test results are interesting, but they do not tell you which gun you're actually going to want to shoot. And that is where my completely unbiased but totally correct opinion comes in. We'll start with the Spohr 283 carry. Like I said in my review of their 44 Magnum, this is what a revolver looks like when quality control is taken seriously. The machining, the fit, finish, they're all exceptional. It's a beautifully made gun, but in this case, that craftsmanship did not translate into superior performance. The Smith and the Colt were both more accurate, and the action was good, but not best in its class. And then there is the dry fire issue. With most modern 22 revolvers, occasional dry firing is not a big deal. The Spohr is different. There's a reason it ships with a red tag on the trigger warning you not to dry fire it. Even a single dry fire leaves a visible indentation on the chamber edge. Do that a handful of times and you're likely to create functional problems. Now that quirk might be easier to overlook if it clearly outperformed everything else here, but it doesn't. The first revolver I ever owned was a Ruger GP100, so I'll admit I have a soft spot for these guns. I did not love this particular example, but I do think it has a lot of potential. The main drawback is the trigger. It's smooth, it's a lot more even than the Taurus trigger, but it's extremely heavy, easily north of 15 pounds. I tried a spring kit, but that hurt reliability. It dominated the speed test despite the heavy trigger, which tells me there's a lot more performance possible if the trigger was improved, maybe with some help from a gunsmith. The accuracy issues are a concern, especially the keyholing. If this was my personal gun, I would send it back to Ruger for repair. Most reports I've seen on the 22 GP100 show 1 to 2 inch groups, which is more in line with what I would expect from this gun. It would also be nice to see a 4 inch or a 3 inch model, especially considering the popularity of those barrel lengths for GP100s in other calibers. The Taurus 992 tracker is exactly what you would expect. It's the budget option in this group, and it performs like it. If you simply want a less expensive 22 revolver, I'd probably point you to the Ruger SP101 instead. It's technically a small frame, but it handles kind of like a medium, and it's not a budget tier gun. Where the Taurus stands out, of course, is the convertible cylinder. The option to switch between 22 long rifle and Magnum is undeniably cool. That said, accuracy with the Magnum cylinder was not great. From the factory, the double action trigger is easily the least appealing out of all of these. I tried a 12-pound Wolf hammer spring and it improved significantly. It was still reliable with 22 long rifle, but not at all with 22 Magnum. So you can get a more usable trigger out of this gun, but not if you plan to shoot Magnums regularly. The Colt King Cobra target hits a real sweet spot for a 22 revolver with a size right between the small and medium frame guns, and Colt gives you more barrel length options than anyone else in this category. The double action trigger is classic Colt. It stacks and it has that slightly ambiguous reset that can trip you up if you're used to a Smith or Ruger action. I never completely warmed up to it, especially for rapid fire, but that doesn't make it bad. It's actually light and smooth for a rimfire revolver. If you're not already conditioned to a different trigger feel, there's really nothing wrong with it. Overall, this is a very approachable gun. The sights are good, the grip works, and the trigger is usable right out of the box. Out of these 5, the Colt is probably the easiest starting point for somebody brand new to double action revolvers. And finally, the Smith & Wesson 617 mountain gun. I'll admit right up front that I am partial to Smith revolvers, so it shouldn't surprise anyone that this was my favorite of the group, but that was not a foregone conclusion. Smith could have easily gotten this wrong, and my disappointment would have been intense. Brand preference aside, the performance speaks for itself. The accuracy was outstanding. 6 of the 8 groups I fired were 1 inch or less. That precision is backed up by a fantastic action. It's right at 9 pounds, extremely smooth, and easily on par with any non-custom Smith I've handled. After some long range sessions of filming and data collection, the 617 is always the one I pack up last so I can shoot just one more box of ammo. Not for any kind of testing, but just because it's fun, and that is the highest compliment I can give it. Okay, boys and girls, that wraps up our second category for Project Rimfire. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm gonna take a break from this series for a few weeks to cover some other topics before we return with a new category. What's it gonna be? You'll have to wait to find out, so make sure you are subscribed to our channel, and next time you need some ammo, be sure to get it from us with lightning fast shipping. at Lucky Gunner.